Let me share with you a quote that I came across this week. It comes from Doris Haddock, who went by the name Granny D. In the year 2000, when she was 90 years old, she walked across America. It took her all year, going from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. So let her be a reminder that age should not be an excuse for inactivity. Anyway, here's what she wrote in the quote that I want to share with you. Most people are worth knowing if you will take time to understand them. Unfamiliarity with other people, ignorance of other people, is what makes war possible and violence possible, and drives all social divisions in a school, in a town, nation, or world. When you understand people well enough, you can't help but love them, even if you hate them. If you think these two are incompatible emotions, I remind you to think about your relationship with almost any close family member. Understanding people is loving them. In our text today, we're going to see Jesus' compassionate side. When word begins to spread around about what Jesus is doing, that he's able to bring about healing, people begin to line up to meet him. But even when busy, Jesus takes his time with people. While he brings healing, he encourages people to have faith and to help others and care for others. And we are also called to that same ministry. Our text today is from the 5th chapter of Mark, and I'll begin with verse 21 and ask that you listen for God to speak to us through his word today. When Jesus had crossed again in a boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, he fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and alive. So he went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. And she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, If I touch his clothes, I will be made well. Immediately, the hemorrhaging stopped, and she felt her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that the power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned around in the crowd and said, Who touched my clothes? And the disciples said to him, You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, Who touched me? He looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. And while he was still speaking, some people came from the leader's house to say, Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the leader of the synagogue, Do not fear, only believe. He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And they came to the house of the leader of the synagogue. He saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he entered, he said to them, Why do you make a commotion and weep? the child is not dead, but sleeping." But they laughed at him. He put them all outside. He took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and they went to where the child was. And he took her by the hand, and he said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this time they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Have you ever had a dream in which there was something that you needed to do, something that you were committed to do, but something else kept getting in your direction or getting in your way? It feels as if you're caught in this kind of Kafkaesque type story, unable to escape and unable to do what needs to be done. Or maybe you've had such experiences happen to you in your real life. You agreed to meet a friend at a specific time, and you have set out and allowed plenty of time for you to get there to where you are meeting, and then there's obstacles that begin to appear. There's an accident, a traffic jam. You get lost, or you come to someone that's in need and you stop to help. I know I mentioned in one of my newsletter pieces back a few months ago about an experience I had in Idaho. This was when I was in seminary, and I was running during this summer a camp that was in the Sawtooth Mountains of Idaho. And on this particular day, it was a Sunday, and I was scheduled to preach that day in the town of Twin Falls, which is about 90 miles south of where the camp was located. I allowed about an extra hour for the journey, but I did not realize that that was the morning in which they brought all the sheep up for the summer to the summer pastures in the mountains. So there I was, blocked with hundreds of thousands of sheep. In those pre-cell phone days, I was frantic. When I finally got through all those beasts, I drove at a high speed down through the lava flows down in the southern part of Idaho. And I arrived before I was scheduled to be up to speak, but it was still 10 minutes after the service had begun. Whether in dreams or in real life, I'm sure most of us have had similar experiences in our own lives. We feel strongly about doing something, and then something else intervenes. And I think Jesus knew that feeling. I think Jesus probably had that feeling on the day that we've looked at in our scriptures this morning. Mark is famous for his sandwich stories. Such stories involve Jesus talking about something or doing something, and then he's interrupted, and the plot seems to move in a different direction than it had been heading, which allows time for things to happen and for tension to build within the story. And today's story is an example of one of these sandwich stories of Mark. Jairus' father, who appears to be a rabbi in a synagogue, appeals to Jesus to help his daughter. And Jesus is moved, and he goes with Jairus to see what he can do. But there's a crowd. I mean, this is a first century traffic jam. They must push themselves through the masses as they try to make it to Jared's house before it's too late. Or maybe the masses are kind of gathering around and they're kind of following Jesus because they want to see a miracle. But the crowd hinders their travel to Jairus' home. I mean, why though? Can't they see that Jesus has important work to do? Of course, this was in the day before you had flashing lights and sirens to help clear a path. But then our story shifts as Mark tells us about a woman who has been suffering with this bleeding issue for 12 years. The same number of years, by the way, that Jairus has had this daughter that he cherishes. For her, the years have been hard. She has poured all of her resources into getting well, and now she is penniless and hopeless. Notice that Jairus, who had resources, approaches Jesus from the front. He knows his position in society. But this woman approaches Jesus from behind. I mean, she has no hope left in the medical community. Her only chance is with Jesus to heal. But she's kind of a nobody. So she comes up from behind and thinks if she could just touch his clothes, if she could just reach out and touch the hem of his garment, that would be all it would take. That would make her better. There is a certain amount of superstition in her wish. And it's almost as if she believes that the power is in Jesus' clothes. That's not where there is power. But the power is with Jesus. The power is with God. The unnamed woman pushes through the crowd and reaches out and touches Jesus' garment. And the picture that we have is of a thick crowd all around, which does beg the question, the one that the disciples ask, is how did Jesus know that a particular woman had touched him? But Jesus has felt the power from his body being drawn out and into this person. We can imagine what Jairus must have been thinking as this interruption delays Jesus. When the woman had been healed, identifies herself, Jesus displays kindness, and Jesus maintains her dignity. He doesn't say, I made you well. Had he done that, which would have been within his right, it would have been focusing the healing back on himself. Instead, this is about her needs. Jesus credits her own faith for bringing healing. Now, after the delay, we're back to our original issue, Jairus' daughter. But before they resume the trip, they're met by those who have just come from Jairus' home. And they tell that the daughter has died. We can imagine that Jairus' heart dropped when he hears this. And they tell him, there's no need to bother Jesus anymore. But Jesus encourages Jairus to continue to believe as he gathers his inner circle, Peter, James, and John. And together, the five of them head to Jairus' home. The unknown and the penniless woman was healed in public. Jairus' daughter will be dealt with in a more private setting. Just a few family members, the mother and the father, along with 3 disciples. But when they arrive at the house, they see the Ladies' Guild has already swung into action. I mean, think about it. Casseroles are coming in as they're making a fuss and they're crying over this daughter that has died, and they're trying to console this grieving mother. Some of those who've gathered may have even been paid mourners. That was a thing back then. They go to wherever there is a death. And they're making a commotion, but are they really grieving? For when Jesus says she's only sleeping, they change from grief to laughter. Now, I hope you catch the subtle humor that is here in Mark's story. It's funny. All these grieving women including professional grievers, making this big commotion, and they're unable to wake up the sleeping daughter. And then we have this image of Jesus coming in, and we can kind of picture him being all gentle, taking her hand in his own, and just saying very quietly, softly to her, "Little girl, get up." And she hears him and responds. And she sits up and stands up and begins to walk around. Jesus' voice is heard over the ruckus that has been going on around the girl. Then Jesus asks that they keep this resurrection story quiet. Of course, we know they don't do that. That's how it ended up in Mark's gospel. But he also then has a strange request. He says, let's get the girl something to eat. Let's take care of her needs. She's hungry. We're not told of what happened, but I almost can see the father jumping in and taking over. I mean, heck, he might have even dug out dessert for her to have, even if it wasn't even after dinner. Now, these two stories get mingled together. A woman regains her health, and a father is restored to his daughter. Good work, Jesus. But Jesus doesn't claim the credit. He credits their faith. Not only do they experience grace, but they also get to maintain their dignity. That's the way it is with Jesus. Jesus intervenes in our lives, and if he does, and as God, he is free to do that, we should be grateful. We should be thankful. But until then, we should have faith in Jesus, in the one who has power not only to heal, but power over creation itself. Amen.